Love is a drag, it's absurd. A romance novel. It's absurd. You can't simply be considering this fool's wishes. He couldn't help but shout. The countess was not having it. Her eyes were piercing him. Knock. It was hard to discern who was more furious. The room was very unsettling. Her words were only of hate and malice. Knock. It wasn't easy to take the current situation at face value. Knock. The sound pulled Brian from the pages. The room filled with the sound of a thump that is more easily described as a knock. Could you stop? Please. Brian leaned back in his chair asking politely. The clutter of Brian's desk showed the habits of a messy person who also had a bit of OCD. His noodle cups were a clean stack next to an open bag of hot chips. A small stack of comics rested on the edge of the desk next to his keyboard. Well, since you asked so nicely. Sophia's voice whispered in his ear as his feet lifted into the air. Brian's chair was tilted like the axis of the earth. Brian grabbed his arm rests clinging to life. All you do is read, she said, resting her chin on his shoulder. Brian couldn't speak until he was planted back onto the ground. The countess just figured out who the rat was. Brian let his words flow out quietly as he bookmarked his place. Interesting. Interesting. But there are things happening in real life. Sophia said, pulling his head back. Their eyes locked. You're not gonna kiss me again, are you? Sophia ignored his question for all of 2 seconds as she went back to her bed. No, like I said when I was drunk. You are the only kiss with a guy I will ever have. The knocks returned as Sophia ledded back in bed. If you promise to stop throwing that ball, I will go out with you. The knocking subsided with excitement as Sophia jumped to her feet. Brian tossed his book onto his desk as Sophia wrapped around him. Sophia's hug became tighter as he spoke. Am I a good kisser? I don't know, I'm the wrong demographic for this question. Brian pulled his feet up into his chair as he hugged them. He turned his gaze to Sophia, who was checking herself out in the mirror. Her long orange hair came down the sides of her tight tank top and black leggings. Her hair was shaved in the back and her bangs were as short as they could be. Come on, get dressed. I heard there's some new band playing at Layton's. I don't know why you like that place. It smells of burnt crust. Brian said, standing up as his chair slid back on its wheels. You're just a sourpuss. Sophia's words came with a hoodie that she flung over Brian. They left, locking their door. Sophia pulled Brian close as they walked. Sophia was zipping up her coat as a rice bar hung from her mouth. The sedan question. Sophia's words came out jumbled as she talked through a rice bar. Don't talk with your mouth full, I can't understand you. Brian said, holding the door open for Sophia. I said. Why the sudden question about kissing? Brian locked eyes with the street light above the stairs as he thought about what to say. I don't know. Maybe I'm just feeling alone. Sophia adjusted her outfit as they started walking again. There was a silence that started to permeate. The sound of the crossing walk filled said silence. Well, we are going to a place with people. And I would imagine females will be there. So let me be your wings and guide you to victory. Sophia's words boomed as she swung around the stop sign. The light changed as they walked. What about you? Brian asked. Walking backwards, watching her strut behind him. Who, me? I'll just have to leave dry tonight. I mean, I'll be happy as long as you are. Sophia said, gripping her heart in her chest. What would I do without you? Brian asked himself as he held open the door to Layton's. Let's hope we never find out. The place was dark. Sophia grabbed a table. A waiter. And the attention of everyone inside with her loud voice. The opening band seemed to be wrapping up. We're stuck at 6 and this is our song, Grunge War. The lead singer's voice boomed over the small crowd as they played fast and loud. Brian was a little unimpressed as he sat there twiddling his thumbs waiting on their drinks. Sophia seemed to be enjoying herself as she rocked back and forth in her chair, and as the band slowed to a stop she was the only one cheering. Brian couldn't help but admire her boisterous personality like he always did. As the drinks hit the table, the next band took center stage. Brian's eyes couldn't help but examine the performers. The same instruments as last time filled the space, but this time a keyboard was set up. Seemed to be a simple four-piece band. Guitar, drums, bass, and keyboard. Brian just sipped his beer and waited for them to play. There was a faint whisper coming from the stage. It was a bit too dark until lights above the stage flashed on. Dyed pink hair stood center stage with a colorful keyboardist to her right. On drums was a very energetic woman with hair down to her feet. And finally on the left was a girl bunched up on her guitar. "We are the Ambers." Everyone became quiet as the lead singer grabbed the mic. Brian watched as she slid to her left holding the mic out to the guitarist. "This song has a name that we haven't thought of yet." Brian sat up more as the voice of the guitarist gently filled the room. It was quiet and sweet. She was hiding behind her black glasses that bounced the stage light back at the audience. Her fingers barely gripped the neck of the guitar as the sleeves of her raincoat engulfed them. Her bangs fell over her glasses as the rest of her black hair hit her shoulders. You almost couldn't see her sneakers because her black skirt almost hit the floor. Every detail poured into Brian's mind as he felt entangled with her beauty. Everything about her drew his eyes. Brian leaned forward in his chair watching and waiting. That's when the music began. It was fast and funky with a punk/disco beat with lyrics of detest for the government and the betrayal of lovers. There was a bit of darkness to it all. Brian couldn't help but applaud when they had finished their set of just 3 songs. "See, are you not glad we came?" Sophia asked, trying to obscure Brian's view with her face. Brian was silent. He couldn't help but feel a bit embarrassed. "What's wrong with you?" Sophia asked, shaking him. Brian wanted to put his head in his lap and scream. This was an existential crisis for Brian. He couldn't work up any amount of courage to do any amount of anything. "Sophie. I'm scared." Brian's words came with a worried look. Sophia analyzed his expression. "We use big boy words here," she said, getting Brian into a headlock. "It's the guitarist." Brian whispered through his fear. Sophia rubbed his back consoling him. Sophia pulled herself up dragging Brian as he downed his drink. Brian stumbled to his feet as people were leaving their tables. They drifted through the people with intent. Sophia was on a mission and Brian was on beer. But it wasn't enough to quell his emotions. The band was making their way off stage and out the back. Sophia was determined. "You liked our set?" the keyboardist asked, pulling in front of them. She was like an 80s rock star in a man's body. "Wicked cool. We want nothing more than to party with you guys." Sophia's words pulled through the loud bar. She smiled, pulling out her phone. "I'll text you the address for where we are turning up next." Sophia gladly got her details down. Brian couldn't help but hide behind his savior. Sophia pushed them back to their table. "Okay, party, we're there," Sophia said, flashing Brian her phone. Brian put his head down on the table. "Is it too late to back out?" Brian asked Sophia, but he was really asking himself. Sophia wouldn't give him the option to back out. After another drink they waited for their rideshare. Brian's stomach felt like it wanted to implode. He just sat quietly in the car as Sophia chatted up the driver about different music. Sophia pushed Brian out of the car as they stopped. Brian doubled over like he was about to paint the sidewalk with his insides. Sophia dragged Brian out of the street. She pulled him close as they walked down the block. A couple houses down the road the band was pulling up amongst others who were entering the house. Brian smushed himself into Sophia as he saw the girl that stunned him. "How far are we from the dorms?" Brian asked, looking around. Sophia ignored him as she waved to the flamboyant keyboardist who was heading inside. Brian clanged to his friend as they pierced the doorway. Random strangers stood taking up space in this living room. Brian didn't want to look up, but when he did his eyes scanned. He noticed her. She was sitting awkwardly by the lead singer as she nervously strung her guitar that was standing next to her. Sophia pulled her arm around Brian's neck as they planted onto a musty couch. Brian couldn't help but glance at her. Obviously he felt wrong objectifying her. But she was a visual stimulus that sent his body into an emotional shock. Out of the corner of her eye she glanced at him. Brian was shocked. She sent shivers through his body. Brian quickly pushed Sophia off of him. Brian just put his hands on his lap as the owner of the house was greeting people she had not met before. Soda and snacks started littering the coffee table. Brian felt too nervous to eat or drink. He was already uncomfortable around strangers, let alone this girl that he wanted badly to get to know. Sophia began feeding Brian chips and giving him sips off her soda. He became mindless only to snap out of it as smiles erupted watching them. Brian made eye contact with the girl across from him that he was admiring. He almost melted at her smile. Brian sprung up, pushing Sophia away from him. Sophia did not get mad at him, however, she just smiled at him, as did everyone else. "A bathroom?" Brian fumbled his words as the host directed him down the hall. Brian splashed water on his face after a quick relief. When he stumbled out of the bathroom, he noticed people cluttered around the coffee table as tarot cards cleared the way. Brian scanned the small crowd as he noticed his dream girl heading for the front door. Brian quickly bumped Sophia, interrupting conversation. "Let me get a cig," he said, pulling on her shirt. Sophia rolled her eyes, pulling out a pack labeled American Spirits. Brian swiped the whole pack from her as he made his way outside. The wind caught him off guard. His eyes followed the wooden railings circling the porch until they landed on the girl leaning on the wall. She pulled herself up as he closed the door behind him. "Sorry to bother you," Brian said as he lit up a smoke. The taste relaxed him and sensation leveled him out. Brian held out his pack. "Oh, I don't smoke." Her voice was quiet and soft. Brian felt his body lean more towards her. "Well, I only smoke when I need some air," Brian said, trying to finish his smoke fast. "You must not get out a lot then," she said, raising her brows. Brian just looked at her confused. That was a joke. "Sorry, I'm not the best at small talk." Her hands grabbed each other as her body looked like it wanted to implode. "That's okay. I mean, not everyone needs to be good at everything. I mean, you're great at talking because I'm just bad at being talked at." Brian's words slowed with each syllable until he was frustrated with himself. Brian grabbed the door. "I'm Amber, by the way," she said, blurting out her words. "Brian." He let go of the door as his name softly left his mouth. "You know, you guys are really cute," Amber said, pushing off the wall. Brian's mind went foggy until he realized what she said. But no, she's gay, we are just best friends." His words dribbled out of his mouth as Amber laughed. "Wow, you have an adorable laugh." Brian's heart was almost beating out of his chest. Amber became silent as she looked at him. "I'm sorry, that was weird, I. Before Brian could think of what to say, the door opened behind him. Sophia wrapped her arm around him as her hand fell on his chest, feeling how intense his body was. "Hi, I'm Sophie." Sophia's words were loud until they weren't. "Just relax," she whispered into Brian's ear. "Oh, I'm Amber," Amber said, perking up a bit. The sound of the bug zapper on the porch filled Brian's head as he felt like exploding. "Like the band," Sophia said excitedly, remembering the name. Amber just nodded as she looked for an opening past them to the door. Sophia turned to the side, holding Brian as Amber walked through. Brian was breathing heavily. "Do you want to go back inside?" Brian simply nodded, letting Sophia drag him back inside. The cards on the table had switched to playing cards as they plopped back onto the couch. Amber seemed to be gathering her things with the other bandmates. Brian wanted to die. He felt sick to his stomach. "Maybe we should just leave." Brian again nodded to her words, and in a moment they were gone. Another quiet rideshare later and they were back at the dorms. Brian just stayed quiet until their door closed behind them. He collapsed onto his bed as Sophia collapsed on top of him. "What is wrong with me?" Sophia started petting his hair. "Nothing is wrong with you. You just aren't used to talking to girls." Sophia's words did not help. "You're a girl," Brian said, turning over in bed. "But I'm the exception. Besides, it doesn't matter how much of a fool you presented yourself as because I got her number." Sophia said, peeling off Brian. His attention fixated on her. That's right, the keyboardist gave it to me, she said, showing the glowing number in her phone contacts. Brian was astonished by what Sophia had accomplished for him. But I made a fool of myself. Brian's words wrapped around his pillow as his arms did. Come on. Don't be scared. None of that will matter to her. Hopefully. Sophia sat across on her bed thinking. Just call her tomorrow and say you've been thinking of her. Brian couldn't even think of saying that to her. That's even worse than me making a fool of myself. Brian said. Muffled into his pillow. Brian knew exactly what she was gonna say next and was hoping the conversation would just end. Just be yourself. Sophia's words came with a pillow launched at her. This angered her as she pulled herself up, falling forward onto Brian. She pinned him to the bed. Sophia held a dangled spit above his face. Okay, I'll call her. Brian shouted, trying to escape her grasp. Sophia pulled her saliva back into her mouth as she released Brian. Brian crawled under his covers, trying to ignore his roommate. He pulled his book from his desk, hopeful that he could escape even if only for a moment. They were circled around the war room. Tensions were high as a plan was being devised to catch the rat in his act before everyone took their roles in an upcoming big battle. The world only wrapped around Brian for a couple pages until his mind began to drift as his eyes became heavy. He simply fell asleep. Brian wanted to ignore all his alarms, but his classes were somewhat important to him, especially since he was paying for them. His eyes peeked out from his covers, noticing the emptiness in the room. He was alone. Brian quickly pulled together his outfit, brushing his hair behind his ears, and gathering all his things into his backpack. Brian stumbled to the door as Sophia opened it. You call her yet? Sophia asked as she tossed her backpack onto her bed. Brian rolled his eyes and pushed by her. He had almost forgotten about Amber. The moment she came back into his mind, Brian lost all focus for the day. She was all he could think about. Their interaction was small, and yet she wouldn't leave his mind. Brian had 3 classes today with small gaps between them that consisted of snacks and briskly walking between buildings. He got 1 text during math. It was Sophia resending Amber's number. The day went by quick. Brian was heading back to his room as a corndog hung out of his mouth. As he opened the door, Sophia held a phone to his ear. Brian was confused until he heard a hello. It was Amber's voice. Brian froze as his eyes went wide. Sophia gently pulled the corndog from his mouth. Hello? Amber asked, getting a bit frustrated. Oh, hi Amber, it's Brian from last night. Brian's words came with silence. I got your number from. Brian started to draw a blank as his eyes darted to Sophia's lips as she mouthed words to him. From Rudy. And I liked talking to you, so I wanted to do it again. There was even more silence than last time. We have a show tomorrow. I'll text you the details. Amber said quietly. This is Sophia's phone, so I'll text you from mine. Brian could feel his heart pump fast with each word that left his mouth. Okay, sounds good. Amber's words fell silent as she hung up. Brian stood frozen in the doorway as Sophia took a bite out of his corndog before sticking it back in his mouth. Brian let the corndog fall out of his mouth and hit the floor. There was a rage of emotions inside him bursting to the surface. You're the greatest person I have had the pleasure to ever know. Brian said, admiring Sophia as she sat down on her bed opening her laptop. Sophia stuck her tongue out, making a fart noise. Try not to be such a word salad around Amber. Sophia drew her attention to an essay she was in the middle of writing. You're coming with me, right? Brian asked as he closed the door behind him. I'd walk to the ends of the world with you. Now text me that site you sourced for your history essay. Brian happily did what Sophia told him to as he opened his backpack, pulling out his homework. Brian was still thinking of Amber because of course why wouldn't he? But he was thinking about Sophia more. They continued in small talk as they worked on their studies. The day of the date was peaceful. Mary had asked to meet with Liam alone, and I wanted to get home and get ready, so I was happy when Aurora agreed that we'd just wait until 5:30 when I got to her house to pick her up. My sisters were excited to be our drivers and my mom made sure that my cloths were clean and pressed. I did try to argue that I can take care of myself but just accepted that she's awesome. I find that wealth intimidates me. I know it's weird and I've only experienced it a few times, but I definitely feel anxious when going into a fancy place. It just feels like I don't belong. I remember having this feeling for the first time when I went to a teammate's house on his invitation. His family was welcoming. But I just felt on edge. I didn't want to touch anything. I was guarded with my words. And just ended up acting shy or even aloof. When thinking back about it, I realized that it was my own insecurities that caused my behavior. To me. From my experiences. A home's general state is one of chaos and interaction. Walking into a home that is calm, quiet and peaceful just felt weird to me. Seeing a kitchen that is as large as my apartment was unsettling. To this day I have no clue how many people were in that house. I know he has 3 siblings but didn't see any of them. His mom met us in the kitchen and offered us a snack. His dad waved a hi from down a hall. We went downstairs to a room with a leather couch, gaming system, and massive television. We played some games. But I never felt comfortable. I didn't stay long and made an excuse to get away because I didn't want to feel worried about saying something wrong or touching something I shouldn't or acting different than expectations. That's how I felt when pulling up to Aurora's house. It looked like some sort of stone castle with gates in front that were open when we got there. We drove up the driveway and Brenda parked her SUV at the walkway to the front door. I could tell that my sisters were uncomfortable even though they had an idea of the area Aurora lived in. My hands were shaking and sweaty. I wanted to tell my sisters to head back home. Not because I was worried about the date, but because I was intimidated. I took a deep breath and was starting to count to 10 when my sister Bailey looked back and said, "Go get your girl Ben." With a big smile. I don't know why. But it was the perfect thing to say at the perfect time. I calmed down immediately and went to the front door to ring the bell. I didn't expect to be greeted by a young girl. And she caught me by surprise when she welcomed me. She looked like a mini version of Aurora while holding her hand straight out at me. Aurora's dad quickly approached as I was trying to understand what was happening. He shook my hand and we walked into his entranceway. I really don't remember much other than talking about a signed Mike Trout jersey that he had framed on the wall. That's when she came down the stairs. She glided down the stairs, stopped for a second to say bye to her dad and floated by me like those Russian ballet dancers that move like dolls. I don't know if this is a common thing or not. But my whole body just felt rigid as she walked by me. Like I was stuck in that moment in time. I'm sorry that I lack the words to describe her beauty other than to describe it as a sunrise on a calm day overlooking the ocean. It was the smell of her perfume that jolted me out of it. I followed her out the door and straight to my sister's SUV. She abruptly stopped and turned around when she got to the end of the walkway. Like she had forgotten something. She was looking down at my feet when I caught up and whispered, "Sorry," to me. I thought it was very cute and so very like her. I just said, "Please let me get the door." As I slid by her to the vehicle. I opened it for her. And she actually looked at me with a big smile as she got in. I introduced my sisters from the door and they both said in unison, "Hi Aurora. Thank you for putting up with our brother Ben." I quickly walked around to the other side and settled in beside her. It was a quiet drive to the zoo. I'd talked to my sisters about it. And they had promised to not bombard Aurora with questions and to keep the music down. I was nervous as hell. And it looked like she was as well. She was looking down at her hands and rubbing them together. That's when I asked, "Do you want to know where we are going?" She startled when I said it. Then took a breath and looked at me to say, "If you want, but I trust you." I chose to tell her simply because I couldn't hold it in anymore. Her reaction was incredible. She broke out in a laugh and flapped her arms while doing it. It's the first time I'd seen true happiness from her. And it can only be described as extravagant. She was hopping in her seat. And I think the seatbelt is all that kept her from hitting her head on the roof. It made me so happy. Seeing her excited just filled me up with joy. She was so free in the moment rather than her usual composed self. I'd only been to the zoo once before. It was a school trip when I was 11. It's awesome seeing animals, but really it ended up being more about running around, looking at cool animals, and getting ice cream. It wasn't what I had planned for Aurora. We wouldn't be walking through the whole area. That would take a day, not a few hours. Instead, we were just going to the Penguin Building because our zoo is incredible. I didn't know that buildings could be booked for special occasions. I didn't know that there were event rooms in these buildings. And I don't think Aurora did either. The plan was simple but perfect in my opinion. We'd go to the penguins, eat while watching them, and then we would paint together. She grabbed my hand as soon as I opened the door for her. It was like I was a toy that she wanted to show off to her friends. My sisters didn't say anything. They knew their responsibilities. She took me straight to the penguin complex. She walked fast, didn't look back, and held my hand the whole way. Her determination was next level and behavior was on point. Pretty fantastic to see though. LOL. The penguin area had 2 public viewing options. You could go low where you can see the penguins swimming in the water from behind a glass. They're shaped like torpedoes and are just plain speed and agility when in their element. Or you can go to the high viewing area where you see them waddle on land, trip, honk, and just be comedians honestly. The dichotomy is obvious but still incredible to see. Aurora took me to the higher viewing area. There were at least 40 penguins in the complex and she could tell me the name of every one of them. I was standing beside this model as she held my hand and pointed out everything she loved about where I had taken her. Think about that for a second. Tell me you have a better start to a date with an angel. I picked up on maybe half of the names because she was pointing and talking so fast. Not because I was uninterested. Distracted in the moment a bit. Maybe. But definitely interested. I confirmed some of the penguin names. Commented on how handsome, cool, smart, or athletic some looked. And she loved every moment of the talk. I then asked if she wanted to grab a bite. That's when we went to the event room. Aurora's parents had mentioned that it is available for no charge for her because it wasn't booked this night and everyone at the zoo loves Aurora. I don't know if that is the truth. But I do know that the staff were very friendly with her. And it was clear that they cared for each other. This was truly my one real worry about the date. I'm a teenager trying to impress a goddess. But I didn't want to end up enslaved in my attempt. I was on guard for extra costs or hidden charges. None ever emerged, and one of my few regrets is the time I spent worrying about it. The event room was off to the side of the penguin paddock rather than the straight-on view that the public got. It had 2 levels. But you were way closer to what the penguins were doing. We came in on the top level and there was an area where you could walk onto the land area with the penguins and engage them directly. A staff member was there to guide us, but Aurora was aware of the rules and trusted. So she was able to lead me directly into the space. She did look a little surprised that it was there though. I think she fed them from a different entry space. She introduced me to a couple of them. Romeo. Yeah, apparently. He's always the first to approach the ladies. And Sally. She just happened to be near us. We're fascinating. I don't know how I'll ever forget the moment where Aurora was crouched down, Romeo at her hand and Sally walking towards her hip. It just looked like a fantasy movie. We then went to the lower area to eat. My sisters had the job of grabbing our food and taking it down to the picnic tables. Brenda was the one that told us the food was ready while we were playing with Romeo and Sally. We had a picnic table where we could sit side by side while watching the penguins swim. Aurora's favorite meal is chicken fingers and fries. No dip. No garnish. Just the zoo cafeteria chicken fingers and fries. She actually hates the school cafeteria chicken fingers. That's why I never had a clue that this would be her favorite. I thought the fries we were eating together when we met were just a cheap snack to help us bond, but apparently fries are one of her favorite things in life, and the school lunch lady lacks the ability to bread and fry a chicken strip appropriately for her. It's a mind noodle to think about it, and I was totally stretched on the thought. Here's a very well-off model princess with an addiction to fried chicken fingers and potatoes. I don't know how much more I could fall for her. I wasn't eating chicken fingers though. That wasn't happening. Chicken has been part of my life way too much. I truly wish it would go away. I wanted a burger. Something with sauces and accompaniments that were fresh and crunchy. I took the risk of a sauce spill and had a burger while she ate her fingers and fries while pointing at the penguins whipping by our spot. We sat eating while watching these rocket-fast penguins fly by us. Aurora wasn't fixated on me. Or the moment. She was stuck on the penguins. It's fine. I expected that. I started asking her about her favorites and if she had any pictures. She pulled her phone out and showed me some. I focused on the angles and colors in the pictures. I could tell that she had a good eye for capturing profiles. I asked if she had ever tried painting before and she said no. I then asked, "Would you like to try right now?" She looked confused as she responded, "We can't paint here." I smiled and asked her to come upstairs. My sisters and the zoo staff had set up an area overlooking the enclosure. There was a mat on the ground. A couple of easels and a table with my watercolor paints. There was even a couple of smocks so that we didn't get our clothes dirty. I looked at her and said, "Painting is one of my favorite things. Would you be okay painting with me?" I could tell that she was scared. She was looking downward, glancing here and there like she was struggling to find something to focus on. I knew that it wasn't the time for me to push her or anything like that. I just walked over to the easels and set them up a few feet from each other. I then said, "Please just come over and try when you feel ready." I grabbed a black pencil and drew the outline of a smaller penguin that was standing still near the water. I then pointed at it and asked, "What's that one's name?" She looked down at it and said, "That's Leo because he's so handsome." I laughed and said, "That's awesome. I've drawn his profile here if you'd like to try painting him." I then moved to my easel and started my picture. I knew the picture I wanted to draw. She needed some time to collect herself. She would look at Leo and then the sketch. And then me. She'd then rub her hands together and look at them. I knew the moment she had decided to join me. She stood up tall, head held high, and walked over to her easel right beside me. I helped her put on her frock. I showed her quickly how to dip her brush into the water and the paint and said, "I'm here to help. But this is your painting. Do whatever you feel like with it. There is no right or wrong when it comes to this stuff." She asked for help getting her colors darker but was otherwise comfortable. Even excited sometimes. I found myself staring at her. Her concentration was amazing to watch. Before we knew it, our time was done. I'm not going to say that the paintings were fantastic works of art or anything like that. I was impressed by her use of color for the water. It looked excellent. She left Leo as I had drawn with just negative space while focusing on his background. My picture was as you would expect. Two of the penguins leaning into each other, leaving a heart shape between them. It was Brenda that came to us to give us a 15-minute warning. Enough time for us to look at each other's creations and clean up. I could tell that Aurora was frustrated with having to stop. Her chin started to scrunch up a bit. But she relaxed when I said, "Paintings are always a work in progress. This is just the start of ours. We'll do some more next time. Okay?" She nodded, smiled, and pointed at my painting while asking, "Which penguins were you drawing?" I pointed at the two that I had used as my initial sketch. She was glowing a bit when she said, "Their names are Ross and Rachel. But I wish they were Ben and Aurora." My heart leapt at that moment. And I knew that she'd grabbed it with both hands. I'd bought a satchel for her to carry her painting in. I had an old one for me. It had straps so that you could wear it like a backpack. She loved the gift and hugged me when I showed her how it worked. It was a quick reflexive hug that she immediately backed off from. But it was a moment for me. Her hair wisped across my nose and her scent invaded my nostrils like a sea breeze. It was incredible. The ride home was quiet. She kept the satchel on her lap and was staring down at it like she was trying to envision the painting inside. She waited for me to open the SUV door when we got to her house. She said, "Thank you for driving and taking care of me. It was so nice to meet you both." To my sisters. They were chirping nice responses to her as I helped Aurora get out with her painting. She held it by her side as we walked to her door. Her pace was much slower than when we came out. She almost had a jump in her step rather than a glide. When we got to the door, she turned to me and asked, "Can we do this again soon? I had a great time and would like to paint some more with you." I replied, "Of course." I took pictures of Leo, Ben and Aurora for us to use when we get a chance. With a big smile, she started to say, "Ross N." Then she caught on and smiled back. That's when it happened. I could see her lean in. And I asked, "May I kiss you goodnight?" She closed her eyes and said, "Yes. Please." I was careful to not pull her to me. I knew that would be a mistake. I tilted my head a bit and pressed my lips to hers. I'll keep the feeling and taste to myself. But it was magical for me. She twirled. Said, "I'll text you tomorrow. Good night." And she was gone into the house. I'm pretty sure I heard some faint woo-hoos coming from inside. I turned and skipped my way to my sisters and allowed myself to smile and play coy with them as they were interrogating me on the way home. So, there it is. The most fabulous, romantic, thrilling evening of my life so far. I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight. My heart is aching. My mind is spinning. And my body is shaking. Adrenaline is coursing through my veins. And I don't want it to stop. I find myself thinking about how this can all work. I find her fascinating. But I also realize that there are complications that are present or yet to be revealed. Personally, I feel a connection to her that I haven't felt before and is more than just physical attraction. I'm staring at my painting right now and I like the lines and colors that I chose. They just look softer and more purposeful than my usual work. I think that is partly from the calm that I feel when she's near me. All I can do is continue to see where this all goes from here. Thank you for reading my story.